I wasn't supposed to find the custody papers until after dinner. When I pulled into the driveway from my Air Force base with my 2-year-old son asleep in the back seat, my husband had already texted me 3 times. "Don't be late. My parents are here. We need to talk." I thought it was another family dinner where his mother would complain about my job and ask when I planned to become a full-time mom. I even picked up her favorite peach pie on the way home. The front door was unlocked. The house was quiet for one strange second. Then I heard voices in the dining room. My husband's entire family was sitting around the table. A woman in a gray business suit stood beside them holding a folder. Before I could even take off my uniform jacket, my husband slid a stack of court papers toward me. "I've already filed for emergency custody," he said. His mother smiled without looking at me. "He deserves a stable home." The woman in the gray suit reached for my son's diaper bag. "I'm here to document today's transfer." I wrapped my arm around my little boy before she could touch him. Then someone knocked on the still-open front door. A calm voice said only one sentence. I believe this meeting started without the whole truth. I stood frozen with my son pressed against my shoulder, still smelling the jet fuel from the flight line on my uniform, while every pair of eyes in that dining room stayed locked on me like I was the one who had done something wrong. The woman in the gray suit slowly lowered her hand but didn't leave. My husband, Eric, leaned back in his chair with a confidence I hadn't seen in months. His mother folded her hands like she had been waiting years for this moment. The voice came again from the doorway. "Mind if I come in?" Everyone turned. Standing there was Colonel Nathan Brooks, commander of my support group at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. He wasn't carrying a weapon or raising his voice. He simply held a sealed envelope in one hand and looked around the room as if he were taking in every detail. "Good evening, Staff Sergeant Harper," he said. "Sir," I answered automatically. He nodded once, then looked at the woman with the folder. "Before anyone separates a military mother from her child, I'd like to know who verified the claims inside those custody papers." The room went silent. Eric forced a smile and said it was a private family matter, but the colonel didn't move. His eyes settled on the documents spread across the table. "Interesting," he said quietly. "Because I happen to have official records that tell a very different story." At that moment I realized this wasn't a surprise family dinner at all. It had been carefully planned while I was serving my country, and somehow the one person they never expected to show up had arrived with the evidence they couldn't explain. Colonel Brooks stepped inside, closed the front door behind him, and calmly placed the sealed envelope on the dining table without taking his eyes off anyone in the room. "Who prepared these custody papers?" he asked. The woman in the gray suit introduced herself as a private family mediator and said she was only there to observe. The colonel gave a polite nod. Observation is one thing. Removing a child based on unverified allegations is another. Eric quickly stood. "Sir, with respect, this has nothing to do with the Air Force." "Ordinarily, I'd agree," the colonel replied. "But when someone uses a service member's military obligations to support false claims of parental abandonment, it becomes my concern." My heart skipped. I hadn't told him anything. I hadn't even known he was coming. He opened the envelope and removed several documents. Staff Sergeant Harper requested emergency leave 3 different times over the past year to attend family counseling and pediatric appointments. He laid each approval on the table one by one. Every request was denied by her husband, who canceled the appointments after she rearranged her duty schedule. Eric's face lost its color. I looked at him, confused. "You told me the counselor canceled." He didn't answer. The colonel continued in the same steady voice. "There's more." He slid another page forward. "These are daycare sign-in records showing your son was dropped off and picked up almost exclusively by his mother whenever she wasn't on duty." Eric's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. That's not what Eric told us." For the first time since I walked through the front door, Cracks began to appear in the story they had built, and I realized someone had been quietly collecting the truth long before I knew I would need it. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. My son lifted his sleepy head from my shoulder, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the little toy airplane clipped to my uniform pocket, completely unaware that the adults around him were watching their version of the story fall apart. Eric finally cleared his throat. "Those papers don't prove she's a good mother." Colonel Brooks didn't argue. Instead, he reached into the envelope again and removed another file. "No, they don't. Parenting isn't measured by one document." He slid a blue folder across the table. "This does show that during the last 14 months, Staff Sergeant Harper declined 2 overseas assignments because she wanted to remain close to her son. Both assignments would have increased her pay and accelerated her promotion." I stared at him. I had never expected anyone outside the base to know that. Eric had mocked me for turning those opportunities down, saying I'd regret choosing diapers over career advancement. Now the truth was sitting in plain view. The colonel wasn't finished. "There's also something I'd like Mr. Harper to explain." He held up a printed email. 3 months ago, someone contacted my office claiming Staff Sergeant Harper had voluntarily abandoned her family and no longer wished to exercise parental responsibility. My stomach tightened. I had never written such an email. Colonel Brooks looked directly at Eric. The message was traced to a laptop registered to this address. Eric's mother slowly turned toward her son. "Eric," she whispered. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The mediator quietly lowered her folder onto the table, no longer looking at me but at him. I suddenly understood why the colonel had come in person. This wasn't about defending me with opinions. It was about exposing a plan that had already begun to unravel before I even drove through the front gate. The mediator took a slow breath and looked at Eric. "Mr. Harper, before we continue, I need to ask you something directly." Her voice had lost the confidence it carried when I walked in. "Did you submit any information to this process that you knew was inaccurate?" Eric laughed once, but it sounded forced. "This is getting blown way out of proportion." Nobody else laughed. Colonel Brooks remained perfectly still. "Answer the question." Eric looked toward his mother as if waiting for her to rescue him, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Finally he muttered, "I may have simplified a few things." The mediator immediately closed her folder. "That's not a legal term." She reached into her briefcase and removed the packet Eric had provided her earlier that week. As she flipped through the pages, she frowned. "These text messages." She held one up. "You claimed your wife wrote, 'I don't want this child anymore.'" My heart pounded. "I never sent that." She looked back at the page. "The screenshots don't include dates, times, or phone numbers." Colonel Brooks nodded. "Because they're edited." He handed her another document. "Our cyber investigations office confirmed those images were altered before they were submitted." The room seemed to shrink around us. Eric's younger brother stared at him in disbelief. His father slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Then the mediator quietly pushed her chair back from the table. "Mr. Harper," she said, "if these documents were intentionally falsified, this is no longer a simple custody discussion." Eric's face turned pale. For the first time since I had walked through that front door, he looked less like someone carrying out a plan and more like someone realizing it had just collapsed. And deep down, I had the feeling this wasn't even the biggest lie waiting to be uncovered. Eric suddenly slammed his palm against the table hard enough to make the coffee cups rattle. "Fine," he shouted. None of this would have been necessary if she'd acted like a real wife instead of living on that base. My son flinched against my shoulder, and I instinctively stepped back. The room fell silent again, but this time no one looked at me. They were all staring at Eric. His father spoke first, his voice low and disappointed. "Is that what this has really been about?" Eric didn't answer. He just paced across the dining room, running both hands through his hair. The mediator quietly packed away the custody paperwork. "I'm ending today's meeting," she said. "I won't participate in any proceeding based on evidence that's already in question." She stood, apologized to me for the distress, and walked toward the front door. Before leaving, she handed me her business card. "If this reaches family court, call me. I'll provide an accurate account of everything I witnessed here." The front door closed behind her, leaving only family in the room. That's when Eric's older sister, Melissa, slowly stood up. She looked at me, then at her brother. "Eric, where did you get those screenshots?" He avoided her eyes. "Online software." Nobody reacted for a moment. Then his father whispered, almost to himself, "You forged evidence against your own wife." Eric's mother sat down heavily, her face drained of color. She had spent months insisting I cared more about my uniform than my family, but even she couldn't defend forged messages. I thought the nightmare was finally ending until Colonel Brooks reached into the envelope one last time and quietly said, "There's still one document no one here has seen yet, and I believe it explains why this entire custody plan was started in the first place." Colonel Brooks laid the final document on the table without saying a word. It wasn't military paperwork. It was a certified property record from the county clerk's office. Eric frowned as soon as he saw it. His mother leaned forward, confused. His father adjusted his glasses. "What is this?" he asked. The colonel looked at Eric before answering. "It's the paperwork for a home purchase scheduled to close next Friday." I stared at the address. It wasn't our house. It was a townhouse on the other side of Raleigh. Eric immediately reached for the papers, but Colonel Brooks placed his hand on them first. "The buyer listed on this property is Eric Harper." My stomach tightened. We'd been arguing for months because he claimed we couldn't afford to replace our leaking roof. He told me every extra dollar had to stay in savings. Yet here was proof that he was buying another house without ever mentioning it. "Where did the down payment come from?" his father asked quietly. Nobody answered. Colonel Brooks slid another page across the table. It showed a cashier's check issued from an account I recognized instantly. Our joint savings account. The same account where we'd been putting money aside since our son was born. Every birthday gift from my parents. Every re-enlistment bonus. Every tax refund. Every dollar we promised would one day help pay for our son's college education. I looked at Eric. "You told me that account barely had enough to cover emergencies." He swallowed hard. I was going to explain. "When?" I asked. "After you took our son?" His silence answered for him. Eric's mother slowly covered her mouth. "You used the baby's savings?" His father pushed his chair back so suddenly it scraped across the hardwood floor. "Tell me she's wrong." Eric stared at the floor. No one needed another answer. The room felt smaller with every passing second. Colonel Brooks wasn't finished. The closing documents also list another future occupant. He turned the page. A woman's name appeared beneath Eric's. Olivia Bennett. I had never heard that name before. Eric's sister looked at him in disbelief. "Who's Olivia?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think." His father laughed bitterly. "You forged evidence, filed for emergency custody, emptied the family savings, and secretly bought another house. At this point, I don't think any of us know what to think." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an alert from our bank. A scheduled transfer had just failed because the account had been temporarily frozen. Earlier that afternoon, after Colonel Brooks unexpectedly called asking if we could meet after work, he'd advised me to contact the bank's fraud department before coming home. I hadn't understood why. Now I did. Eric saw the notification flash across my screen. His face went completely white. "You froze the account?" he asked. "No," I replied calmly. The bank did after I reported suspicious activity. He took one quick step toward me before stopping himself. That money belongs to both of us. Exactly, I said. Which is why you couldn't move the rest of it tonight. His shoulders dropped. The confidence he'd been wearing all evening disappeared. Then someone knocked on the front door again. This time it wasn't another military officer. It was a sheriff's deputy holding a large envelope. "Mr. Eric Harper?" he asked. Eric nodded slowly. The deputy handed him the envelope. "You've been officially served." The deputy turned, wished everyone a good evening, and walked back to his patrol vehicle. Eric opened the packet with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the first page, then suddenly stopped. I looked toward Colonel Brooks. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once. "Your attorney works fast," he said quietly. I blinked. "My attorney?" "The one you spoke to after I called this afternoon," he replied. "She filed for an emergency financial injunction before the courthouse closed." Eric lowered the papers onto the table as though they suddenly weighed 100 pounds. His mother reached for them. Her hands started shaking before she even finished the first page. "They've blocked the house purchase," she whispered. "And they're asking the court to investigate every transfer from the joint account." No one said another word. For the first time all night, the plan Eric had spent months building wasn't simply falling apart. It was turning into evidence against him. The house was silent after the deputy left. No one reached for the dessert sitting untouched in the middle of the table. No one looked at me anymore. Every eye was on Eric. He slowly lowered himself into a chair like his legs could no longer hold him. His father broke the silence first. "I want the truth. All of it. Right now." Eric rubbed his face with both hands. "It's complicated." "No," his father replied. "You made it complicated." I quietly carried my son into the living room and sat on the couch where he could keep coloring in the little activity book we'd brought home from daycare. I didn't want him hearing another argument. Colonel Brooks remained near the doorway, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The evidence was already doing the talking. Eric finally looked up. "About 8 months ago, I met Olivia through work." His mother gasped. His sister closed her eyes. "She didn't want to date a married man," he continued. "So I told her we were already separated." I felt something inside me go completely still. Not because I was shocked anymore, but because every missing piece suddenly fit together. The cancelled family vacations. The weekends he claimed he had overtime. The growing distance between us. The late-night phone calls he always took outside. They hadn't been random. They had been rehearsals for the life he was planning without us. His father shook his head. "So you tried to erase your wife instead of asking for a divorce?" Eric didn't answer. His mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did Olivia know about the custody plan?" Eric hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. "She thought Claire had abandoned us," he admitted. "I told her I was raising our son alone." My stomach turned. Even the other woman had been lied to. Just then, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" A woman spoke nervously. "Is this Claire Harper?" "Yes." "My name is Olivia Bennett." Every person in the dining room froze. Eric's head snapped toward me. "Please don't hang up," she said. "I just found out you're still living in the same house." I stayed quiet. She took a shaky breath. "Your attorney contacted me this evening. She sent me copies of the court filing." I closed my eyes for a second. "I didn't know," Olivia whispered. "Eric told me you had left over a year ago." Eric stood up. "Give me the phone." I stepped back. "No. Olivia continued before he could interrupt. I also didn't know the money for the townhouse came from your family savings. Her voice cracked. I canceled the purchase 30 minutes ago. Eric stared at me in disbelief. You talked to her? No, I answered. My attorney did. Olivia wasn't finished. Claire. I'm so sorry. I feel sick. If the court needs anything from me, I'll tell them exactly what Eric told me. The line went quiet. Thank you, I said softly. She whispered, your little boy deserves better than this, then ended the call. Eric slammed his fist onto the kitchen counter. She had no right. His father stood so quickly his chair tipped over. Stop blaming everyone else, he shouted. Every person who's spoken tonight believed your lies because you gave them lies to believe. Even Eric's mother didn't defend him. She sat staring at the family photographs hanging on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and beach vacations. Moments she once thought were real now felt different. Finally she looked at me, tears filling her eyes. Claire. She whispered. Did you really think we hated you? I looked at her honestly. No. I thought you believed him. She lowered her head because she knew I was right. That was the moment I realized something important. I no longer needed everyone in that room to admit I was innocent. The truth had already done that. What mattered now was protecting my son from whatever came next, because this story wasn't ending inside that dining room. It was about to move into a courtroom, where facts would matter far more than family loyalty. 3 weeks later, I walked into the Wake County Family Courthouse carrying a small notebook instead of a stack of emotions. My attorney, Rebecca Lawson, smiled as she met me outside the courtroom. Remember, she said, today isn't about who tells the saddest story. It's about who tells the truth. I nodded. My son was with my sister that morning, safely away from everything that was about to happen. When the hearing began, Eric sat across the room beside his attorney. His parents were there too, but they didn't sit next to him. They chose the back row instead. That told me more than words ever could. Rebecca presented our evidence one piece at a time. The altered text messages. The fake claims that I had abandoned my family. The property purchase funded with money from our joint savings. The bank records showing transfers Eric never disclosed. Then she played a short recording from Olivia's sworn statement. Olivia calmly explained that Eric had told her he was already divorced, that I rarely saw my son, and that the custody case was simply paperwork to make everything official. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear someone turning pages behind me. Eric's attorney tried to argue that his client had been under emotional stress and made poor decisions while the marriage was failing. The judge listened patiently before asking one question. Did Mr. Harper knowingly submit altered evidence in support of an emergency custody request? Rebecca handed over the forensic report confirming the screenshots had been edited before they were filed. The judge read it carefully, then looked directly at Eric. Mr. Harper, this court expects honesty from every parent seeking custody. Eric lowered his eyes. He didn't answer. After a long pause, the judge continued. Instead of protecting your child, you attempted to manipulate this court by attacking the other parent's character with fabricated evidence. No one moved. Even Eric's attorney remained silent. The judge then reviewed my military schedule, daycare attendance records, medical appointments, and letters from neighbors, teachers, and Colonel Brooks describing my consistent involvement in my son's life. Every document told the same story. I had never abandoned my child. I had arranged my entire career around being present whenever he needed me. Finally, the judge announced the decision. I was awarded primary physical custody. Eric would receive limited parenting time under a structured plan until he completed counseling and complied with all financial orders. The court also ordered him to repay every dollar taken from our joint savings and reimburse my legal fees related to the fraudulent custody filing. As everyone stood to leave, Eric quietly walked toward me in the hallway. For a second, I thought he might finally apologize. Instead, he asked, "Do you think everyone sees me as the bad guy now?" I looked at him for a moment before answering. People didn't reach that conclusion because of me. They reached it because of the choices you made. He didn't say another word. Outside the courthouse, Colonel Brooks was waiting near the steps. He shook my hand with the same calm expression he'd worn the night he walked into my house. "I'm glad the facts were enough," he said. "They were," I replied. He smiled. "Facts usually are." That afternoon I picked up my son from my sister's house. He ran across the yard shouting, "Mommy," and wrapped both arms around my legs. I lifted him into my arms, and he laughed like nothing had happened over the past month. On the drive home, he pointed out airplanes crossing the blue North Carolina sky, smiling every time one flew overhead. Watching him, I realized the greatest victory wasn't winning in court or exposing Eric's lies. It was making sure my little boy would grow up knowing that when life tests your character, the truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs the chance to be heard. 1 year later, life looked completely different. My son had started preschool, and every morning he raced to the front door with his tiny backpack, reminding me that children heal much faster than adults when they're surrounded by love. I accepted a promotion at the base after turning down transfers that would have taken me away from him. This time, I made the decision because it was right for us, not because someone else expected it. Eric completed the counseling ordered by the court and slowly began rebuilding trust with our son through consistent visits. His parents apologized more than once for believing accusations instead of asking questions, and while forgiveness took time, I refused to let bitterness become the lesson my son learned from our story. Looking back, I don't think the biggest victory was winning custody or recovering the money. The biggest victory was refusing to let someone else's lies decide who I was. Truth isn't always the fastest path, but it has a way of arriving exactly when it matters most. If my story reminds you of someone who's been judged before anyone knew the facts, I hope you'll share it with them. Sometimes one voice willing to wait for the truth can change a person's entire life. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoy stories about justice, family, and real-life karma, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next story.